President Trump's Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin dismisses a debt ceiling as, quote, a somewhat ridiculous concept, end quote, something that the GOP and Donald Trump refuted not so long ago during the Obama administration. Mnuchin also promises to get comprehensive tax reform done by the August recess. What are the odds of this? Let's bring in Peter Schiff, CEO, Euro Pacific Capital, to talk about this with us. So let's talk about the debt ceiling. What are your thoughts on the preposterous thought on the debt ceiling that Steve Mnuchin's talking about?
Well, I wish that when Congress first enabled or enacted the debt ceiling, it was at the same time they gave the Federal Reserve the power to buy U.S. Treasuries, which I also regret them doing. But I wish they made the debt ceiling permanent because, every time we get near the ceiling, they raise it. And that is the problem. The problem is not raising the not raising the ceiling. That's the solution to the problem. The problem is all the debt and all the borrowing, and it's unfortunate that this ceiling isn't real because they raise it every time they get near it, although there is a lot of political brinksmanship surrounding it. But at the end of the day, they always raise the debt ceiling, and we always go deeper into debt, and we never pay our bills. And we're never going to pay our bills until something forces us to do it. And unfortunately, I think it's going to be a currency crisis that's going to ultimately force our hand.
How do we explain, though, Steve Mnuchin coming out and saying something like this when Republicans spent the better part of President Obama's presidency obsessed with the importance of the debt ceiling?
Well, look, just like they want to do repeal Obamacare, and they don't want to do it unless they can replace it with something almost as bad. So, the Republicans will say a lot of things for political reasons. But at the end of the day, now that the Republicans have the Congress and the White House, they don't care about fiscal responsibility. They just want to run up as much debt as they need to in order to pay off their constituents.
Right. So they don't want to tax and spend. They want to cut and spend. All right. So what about tax reform? He's talked about comprehensive tax reform. We hear it all the time. He wants to do it by August. There's constant talk about comprehensive. How are voters going to be seeing this? Is it the top 1%? Is it Wall Street taxes? Is it the working man? What is he even talking about here? Because we're not getting a lot of indications of specifics.
Well, I don't think we're going to have any kind of comprehensive tax reform. I think that would be very productive, but I also think it should happen in the context of major reductions in government spending. But that's not going to happen. In fact, government spending is going to increase under Trump, and so I don't see how we're going to have any kind of major comprehensive tax reform. I do think that we may get some tax cuts, similar to the type of tax cuts we got under George Bush, but I also think that they will be accompanied by spending increases. I think we're going to have a coalition between liberal Republicans and Democrats to push through a deficit-increasing gimmick-type tax cut that is not going to stimulate the economy. And, of course, you've got a lot of investors who have been betting heavily on significant tax reform, and I think they're going to find out that those bets are going to end up being losers.
Well, when you talk about all of this and these developments about Steve Mnuchin talking, let's talk about something else that's just developed off Capitol Hill. What do you think about this no vote, this scrapping of the Obamacare Repeal Act? Paul Ryan just came out and said we will be living with Obamacare for the foreseeable future. What do you think of this?
Well, it depends on how long the foreseeable future is, because Obamacare is going to die its own death. In fact, what Trump is doing by not enforcing the penalties for people who don't buy insurance, that is going to cause even fewer people to buy it. And now insurance premiums are going to start rising even faster under Obamacare now than they did before, and that's going to be a bigger problem for employers who are still required to provide it. They're going to have to start cutting pay or cutting workers in order to deal with a faster escalation in insurance costs. So, Obamacare is going to end one way or another, and it might be better that it dies, of its own accord than it being replaced by a rebranded Republican version, because the Republican version wasn't going to work either. I will grant it that it's not as bad as Obamacare, but Trump Care still had some significant flaws that were going to lead to its own demise, despite some of the adjustments that got made at the end to try to woo back some of the Republicans. But it still might be better to go down with this ship, because it might mean it'll be easier to try to have a real market-based solution as opposed to socialized medicine, which I think is what would happen if we went to the Republican platform and then that thing blew up.
Right. So you're talking about us basically hearing the death rattle of Obamacare. You say let's not create something that's less worse for a lot of people, and then wait for that to die. Let's stop it now, but let's talk about the political implications. 7 years on from the day of the signing, Trump said, behind closed doors, vote or nothing, go. And then we've got this.
Well, I think that was a mistake for Trump to take that.
His collateral is his credibility seems to be shot now with this announcement by Paul Ryan.
Well, first of all, by making that kind of ultimatum, I mean, now that it didn't pass, if he comes back to the table and negotiates again, well, now he has no credibility if he tries that tactic in the future. But I don't think he should have said my way or the highway. I think that the most big priority should be getting rid of Obamacare. And if they couldn't do it with this replacement bill, they should go back to the drawing board and work again. Not, for basically Trump to say, look, I'm going to take my marbles and go home. If this bill doesn't happen, then there's no bill. I think that was a gamble that I think he should have known he was going to lose. And there was no real reason for making that kind of gamble.
What do you think the reaction is going to be from the White House this weekend? Just a question for a Friday. What are you expecting to hear, possibly? I have to ask it.
Look, I'm sure he's. Well, I'm sure that the Republicans are going, or Trump is going to find a way to spin this as favorably as he can and try to deflect, a criticism and try to move forward with the rest of his agenda. But I do think it was a mistake, and I think a lot of people will pounce on this loss. And it's unfortunate that the Republicans couldn't come up with a straight repeal of Obamacare and then gone forward with real health care reform, free market reform that would have got the government out of health care and free market forces back in, so we can drive down costs and drive up quality and stop demagoguing it and all about politics and trying to give people something for nothing.
Right. And now, as you say, in so many words, there's blood in the water. Interesting to watch as we move forward. Thank you so much for joining me on this. Peter Schiff, CEO, Euro Pacific Capital.